What's up, YouTube? Recently had the chance to run a one-shot B-movie RPG, and I absolutely loved it. It's only about the second one-shot I've ever done, but I wanted to share my notes. Choose a B-movie storyline. That doesn't mean it has to be, kind of dorky science fiction or pulp action. It could be horror. Anything that lends itself well to cliche, because cliche is not always a bad thing. Cliche is simply something that we know how it turns out because we've seen it before. But a lot of roleplay is about acting out stuff that you've seen before. So cliche is not necessarily the enemy of fun in an RPG. And using a cliche storyline, that is, a storyline that your players can kind of guess where it's going, is a great way to fit a lot of roleplay into a narrow time window. And of course you can still put twists in to make it vivid and memorable. It's also a good tool for the players. Lets them kind of go, I know how this goes. I've watched movies before. Let me show you what happens next. Kind of take charge of the story. And at that point, it sort of becomes a game of let's feel out what's supposed to happen. Let's try and recreate the movies. You know, this iconic, wonderful entity that kind of hovers over us anytime we're at the RPG table. Second thought, and this is actually another reason why B-movie storylines work so well, action and momentum are the most important thing. You know, as the game master, it's always your job to keep the game moving, but especially now. So that means if the party splits up, you may have to find some very convenient ways that they find their way back together, or very coincidentally find exactly the character they needed to talk to. I mean, if you're playing this off as kind of a cheesy movie feel anyway, then using a very contrived ending or scene transition can actually be pretty entertaining. You know, they know you're working with a very narrow time slot, not much margin for error, so they'll go ahead and laugh when they see you sacrifice realism for the sake of plot, as long as all of your unrealisticness gives the story good momentum.
How did you get back here before us?
How did we, Kronk?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
One way to keep the game moving is to move on from locations, even when you think there's still fun to be had there. Another helpful thing I didn't realize how good this was going to be, is to have a PC villain. And that player operated somewhat outside of the normal flow of the game. You know, heroes would do this, he would say, I take a shortcut, I get there ahead of them. He was able to fudge on the player knowledge a little bit, again, for the sake of momentum. And you obviously have to have a strong sense of where the story is going, right? You know, we're not really getting too far off the rails with this one, or we wouldn't hit the ending in time. But if your story is funny, scary, you know, whatever kind of B-movie you're doing, they're going to be excited to see what you've got laid out ahead of them, and they're going to enjoy hamming up their characters along the way. So that brings me to characters. Sketch out their player characters ahead of time. And that's not just to save yourself the time it would take for them to make those characters. It's because you're actually giving them a tool that's going to help them jump right into the gameplay, never be at a loss for what their role is in this context. And this doesn't have to mean you're limiting their freedom. All I gave them was a name, a stereotype, basically how they interact with the other characters, a party role, how they in particular impact the story or pull through for the group, and a motivation. And so you have Lieutenant Bob Wilkins. His stereotype is the I'm getting too old for this cop. His party role is the experienced veteran. His motivation is to get the job done and call it a night. Or you got the hero, Mark Pacific. His stereotype, the average ordinary womanizer. His party role, the guy with the motorcycle. His motivation, it's pretty much explained in the stereotype. Now notice if you have those three elements, how they interact with other characters, what they use to impact the story, and what they base their decisions on, that's really all you need for a character. Tells the players immediately what's their role in the story. But it leaves them a lot of freedom, too, in terms of backstory, in terms of skills, in terms of what engages their emotions. And I even let them fill in skills as we played. Kind of let them make that decision based on the current event rather than starting with a character blueprint. And that may not be your style. You might be afraid that they're going to skill scum, use that as an opportunity to get an in-game advantage that makes it less fun, less immersive for everyone else. But, you know, you just have to know your group. It's also pretty likely they're only going to use the skill once. Just gonna put that out there. And what I found was that laying down the broad strokes ahead of time, in a way, gave them more freedom to play their characters. Right? They were able to play more freely because these are just one-time characters. It sort of doesn't matter what happens to them. But another way, being given a outline of a character, it stimulated a different kind of creativity than you normally use to create a character. Because they were taking something halfway made and bringing it to life. Just make sure they feel the freedom to do that and are not trying to live up to some expectation you had. So it was just interesting to watch. It felt very much like something that we created together, that the players influenced each other in the way they were going to play these characters, kind of in our pre-game discussion. So, one-time RPGs. They're a good thing. I just realized those dead roses are visible back there. It's pretty macabre. I don't know what they're doing there. My wife won't throw them away.